Dungeons & Dragons teaches that diversity is strength, for only a diverse group of adventurers can overcome the many challenges a D&D story presents. In that spirit, making D&D as welcoming and inclusive as possible has moved to the forefront of our priorities over the last 6 years.
One of the explicit design goals of 5th edition D&D is to depict humanity in all its beautiful diversity, by depicting characters who represent an array of ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientations, and beliefs. We want everyone to feel at home around the game table and to see positive reflections of themselves within our products. Human in D&D means everyone, not just fantasy versions of Northern Europeans, and the D&D community is now more diverse than it's ever been.
Throughout the 50-year history of D&D, some peoples in the game, orcs and drow being two of the prime examples, have been characterized as monstrous and evil, using descriptions that are painfully reminiscent of how real-world ethnic groups have been and continue to be denigrated. That's just not right, and it's not something we believe in. Despite our conscious efforts to the contrary, we have allowed some of those old descriptions to reappear in the game. We recognize that to live our values, we have to do an even better job in handling these issues. If we make mistakes, our priority is to make things right. Wizards of the Coast, June 17th, 2020. Rob, we're in the present day.
That's right. It's the second decade of the 21st century, which we're going to call the not-so-roaring 20s. What are they going to call this decade when we're looking back? Probably
the
nothing.
Screaming 20s.
All be dead. But yeah, we're in the 2020s.
We're in the present day. Dungeons and Dragons has gone woke.
Has gone woke. That's right. D&D is woke now, folks.
Here's I guess a question to you, Rob, is like, at least from our perspective as leftists who, like, if we strip away the ridiculous word woke and believe in, like, hey, inclusivity, diversity, these are like values that we love.
Right.
Is 5e woke? So there's like been lots of positive steps Dungeons & Dragons has taken. They have tried to, and we'll talk about this in a second, fix the lore of the Vistani, take away, racially based ability scores, provide space for a book authored only by people of color. There's also been like a lot of missteps from maybe some questionable labor practices, particularly around people who worked for them who were not white. The recent Hadozee controversy. In your perspective, are we at woke D&D?
I mean, let me tell you, I guess, hot take.
Okay.
This is my perspective on it. And this is perhaps unfair, and I'll be accused of all sorts of things. But in my opinion, and I have no evidence of this is just vibes based. But the difference between what Wizards of the Coast is doing and what, for example, Paizo is doing, or any number of other TTRPG companies that have diversity, inclusion, and these ideas at the core of their mission, feels like Wizards of the Coast is being dragged along or trying to appease fans. It does not feel like it has never felt to me like Wizards' attempts at diversity have been truly... It doesn't feel like they mean it, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's not fair. They're trying, as far as I can tell. They're doing possibly their best. But in my opinion, if we're being honest at the moment, I think that they are making token attempts because they realize that their audience has changed. But I don't believe for a second that Wizards of the Coast, subsidiary of Hasbro Incorporated, really cares about these issues. And part of that has to do with who's in charge at Wizards of the Coast, which remains who has been in charge largely for the last 20 plus years.
You've hit at least one thing I agree on, which is that it seems like Wizards is sort of like playing catch up and trying to, maybe in good faith, like be a more inclusive publisher of role-playing games, but they're doing it kind of as an afterthought, and they're 10 steps behind where I feel like any reasonable organization should be. But back to our topic. For the reactionary right, this sort of stumbling, dick-tripping attempt at just being a little bit more inclusive has been the fucking apocalypse.
Yeah, they hated
for the
this.
other part of segment 2, I want to preface this by saying I wasn't really going to go much into this. I was just going to kind of talk about it for a moment. But I've noticed a lot of people have been making videos on this. And for once in my life, or no, I shouldn't say it that way.
For the few times in your life.
Yeah. No,
Time to take a stand, Rob.
Finally, people are saying some of the things I was saying. So I'm going to get into what the topic is in just a moment, but I want to say this first. I've been saying for a while, this is why I don't buy Earth Dawn product, okay? What we're about to talk about, not this exact thing, but this is why I don't buy Earth Dawn product, because I'm not going to give them money to do this shit. And I've been saying this for a long time. They're ruining movies. Oh, it's not that bad. They're ruining comic books. Oh, it's not that bad. It's funny because Garthon told me one of his favorite things for not doing the live stream anymore is he doesn't have to buy comic books anymore because he hates them.
Yeah. They've gotten that bad that you have to buy indie comics now to actually have a good experience.
Well,
Yes.
I would really like to hear
It's not that
Garthon's.
bad. Oh, it's not that bad. You know what? I play 5th edition D&D. You know what? I just play the game. Stop fucking giving them money, and we're going to get into that in a moment.
Rob, stop giving them money.
This is a perfect example of why. Let me share my screen here.
I'll just share with our listeners what the screen says. It says tampons of the coast. Dungeons and Dragons is now safe spaces and stupidity. Rob, for people on the right, this statement, this innocuous statement that we read at the beginning
Legion of Myth. Thank you, Legion of Myth, for this.
Yes. This is just the absolute worst thing to ever happen to role-playing games.
I know we got a lot to cover. What's his gripe with Earth Dawn? Is Earth Dawn woke? I can't keep up with like the right wing, like who's bad and who's good. It's like so.
Oh, Rob, don't worry, we'll get to that. There's
right.
there's a handy list coming up later this episode.
Oh, actually, I do remember this list. Sorry, I can't wait to get to the list. The one of the hashtags appended to this video is #RPGgate. I wonder what that's meant as a reference to.
Yeah. Well, listeners, if you've done your reading and your history, you might have an idea. All right, here's the next clip.
And as inclusive as possible has moved to the forefront of our priorities over the last 6 years. I have a couple problems with that, but I'm going to let you say whatever you want to say first.
You have some problems with that.
Welcoming inclusive as possible has moved to the forefront of our priorities over the last 6 years. And what happened 6 years ago to make this happen?
It's with 5th edition.
Oh, okay. Then, yeah, mistakes were made.
So here are my problems with that. First of all, and I'm going to keep repeating this because it has to be said, I don't understand what this whole welcoming and inclusion is, because I've never kicked anybody out of my game or told somebody they couldn't play my game who wasn't directly disruptive. And usually it was over, female issues, like two people like the same girl or something like that. Not even has to do with race or
personal
gender.
crap.
Yeah.
Okay, Rob. So people are getting real
female
mad
issues. Why would anyone
issues.
feel uncomfortable at that guy's table if he refers to, relationship
women
problems
as females
as female issues? Sorry, sorry, Matt. What were you saying?
I'm just saying, like, yeah, okay, people are mad. I think your point earlier in our conversation about reaction being an emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you find reactionaries reading through like a statement about diversity and inclusion. Well, I don't have a problem with that, but I feel these things because they're touching something deep, some deep fear that I have. That I was on the inside and maybe now I'm on the outside.
One of our other favorite podcasts has made this point many times, but like, this is why conservatives aren't funny, is because they get too mad. They get too mad when they're trying to like talk about the thing they're trying to make fun of.
Sure.
And they just like, they can't tell the joke. They're just like too angry. And it's true. Watch Gutfeld, the most popular late night show on television. And he just like, he can't get, one, his jokes suck. They're awful. But two, he just can't get through them without getting angry.
Yeah.
Decided that they wanted to put gender identity and who this person sleeps with when it's just some random bullshit NPC. any chance that I had of playing Pathfinder went away.
Sorry.
Because I don't want that in my game.
This is exactly what I mean. Sorry, this is exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Somebody's sexual orientation, this guy is like, well, who they sleep with. That whether or not you're attracted to men or women, boiling that down to who you fuck, what you do with your genitalia, that is again, this is at the core of their understanding. Like, they don't hear a straight person say, I have a wife, or I'm attracted to women, and immediately think about, oh, they fuck women, a straight guy. Like, they only think about it when it's not heteronormative, right? And then it becomes implicitly sexual, right? I maybe it goes without saying, but like, putting down an NPC's sexual orientation has nothing to do with who they have sex with necessarily. It's not relevant.
You're absolutely right, Rob. It's the same idea as the only people who can have politics or a sexual orientation are people who are not me, right?
Yes, right.
Because I am neutral and don't have these.
Exactly. Who are outside of the status quo. Continue.
Two more clips from this video against diversity, Dungeons and Dragons.
None of this is an issue. You are making it the issue. Not us conservatives, not us old school players, not the center left heathen dogs. None of us are making this an issue. You're making an issue. You're jamming it down our throat, and we're like, this isn't necessary. It's not needed. Oh, then you must be a hater of some sort. We're going to get to that in a moment. Okay. I got something to show.
Well, surprise, they never get to that. But
they get too mad and they get distracted.
Right. This idea is like, okay, yes. For example, putting something into a game that's like, hey, this game accepts everyone. That's jamming it down our throats, right? Again, This idea that there's no politics in a game or in any text until it is a politics that I disagree with.
Mm-hmm. Wild.
One last clip that I think encapsulates everything.
If he were to be the new developer of Dungeons and Dragons and change it, I'd take a baseball bat to his knees. I don't care if I'm in jail afterward.
Who is this?
You're ruining. It's like the same people are ruining Star Wars. The same people that are ruining comic books are the same. Trying to ruin anime. While that started, Japan has kind of pushed back. Thank you, Japan.
Thank you, Japan.
Thank you, Japan.
They're ruining our fucking hobbies, not by making new stuff that caters to them, by fucking with our stuff that we've been doing for 30 years. And this is why I'm telling you to stop paying them money.
I love this clip in that it's like, yes, D&D belongs to just one group of people. Mm-hmm. This is the thing. It's we are under attack.
Right. When sports reach a certain level of popularity and competitiveness, it is common for the format and the rules of those sports to change to accommodate like certain changes, like football, basketball, cricket, rugby. Like, none of these were all
Quidditch, for example.
These were all sports that were created to be played largely by, white dudes for like pickup leagues. But when they became professionalized and when they started being played by lots of other people, the rules changed, the formats changed. I'm not describing this as necessarily as like inclusion, but when your hobby grows and brings in substantially more people, it is often necessary to change the way that it functions to accommodate the fact that you are now playing a game where, 7-foot tall guys can, leap 12 feet in the air, and it's not a bunch of dumpy white dudes throwing a basketball into a literal basket. Like, it's just like the game must change to fit circumstances. And so if D&D puts out a diversity statement, that's not people coming in and like changing the hobby from top down. That is the hobby responding to a change in the player base. Sorry, he's wrong for other reasons, but like I'm mostly annoyed about how he perceives the way that change happens in games or hobbies.
This particular author, who titled a blog post "Tampons of the Coast: Sensitivity in Safe Spaces," sort of argues that
they hate women so much. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah,
they hate women's, like, it's just like every like little like clue. It's just like so like tampons of the coast, female issues, just like every time they just get so angry. I'm sorry. It's just like, how can you not hear yourself, dude? Do you not hear what you sound like? Anyway, sorry, keep going.
He argues that the base rules are supposed to be in some neutral thing, and he says they're supposed to be for everyone. And I guess it boils down to, like, if you have a statement in your rules that say everyone is welcome here, that is making me feel excluded. You know, I don't know what to tell you, dude, at that point. If that, like, kind of milquetoast diversity and inclusion statement is enough to exclude you, I don't know what to say.
It has absolutely no impact on the game. It doesn't even say something like, we encourage all dungeon masters to be more inclusive in their games. All it says is that, again, this is a boilerplate. This is what's so weird about this, is like, it feels like these conservatives have never had a job before. Like, this is the kind of thing that your stupid, awful mega corporation will send you every few months, and then they will continue to treat women and minorities terribly and fire people for trying to organize and generally be awful. But they'll send, like Matt said, a completely milquetoast statement. Like, this is just absolute bog standard boilerplate. And they get so mad about it. Like, have you never had to go to an HR meeting? Like, have you never had like a sensitivity training? Like, maybe they haven't, but like, there's just like millions of people around the country deal with this all the time in their stupid white collar jobs, and the conservatives get so mad about it. Anyway, sorry.
The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Make no mistake.
Whatever, dude.
Blue and pink-haired social justice warriors who don't even play Dungeons & Dragons are the evil. Sure, in this respect, my words are no different than theirs. And you wouldn't necessarily be wrong if you said, aren't you acting just like them? However, I also believe that sometimes you need to fight fire with fire.
All right, this guy goes on to joke about, like, firebombing the Wizards of the Coast office. He points out this is a joke. But I think these clips are, again, illustrative in that, like, in the reactionary's mind, this sort of hatred against women, especially like blue-haired and pink-haired women, and like problems that they see in movies and comic books, right, which were mentioned several times in the clips we showed, are like, they're all interlinked in their mind. It's all happening together.
Which is correct. Like, we talked about this in the first part of this episode, this monstrous episode. They are right that things are changing, right? That is correct. Like, they are not wrong in their base assumptions. All of the conclusions that they draw are wrong, in my opinion, but they're right. Like, this is all a response to the very good and nice, one of the few bright spots of the 21st century, I would say, visibility and participation of women and people of color in what were traditionally very white male nerdy hobbies. I think it rules and is generally good for everything from speculative fiction all the way down to tabletop RPGs, that there are different types of people involved. You know, there are still plenty of white men. There's still plenty of white men involved in all of these hobbies. There's no shortage of them. But yes, it's true that there are now more women and people of color, and there are more stories about those people.
The second part of the diversity Dungeons and Dragons statement, one of the subpoints specifically addressed a very specific issue in that one of the recent Dungeons and Dragons publications, Ravenloft, has a group called the Vistani, who are, you know, basically all the harmful stereotypes about Romani boiled down into a villainous faction and people in thing. This, as you can imagine, also upset many reactionaries.
Ravenloft is racist and xenophobic because Dementulu, however the hell you pronounce it, is like France, or because there's some similarities between Falkovnia and Germany, or because, you know, they have, Paradon, or whatever it's called, which is just a copy of London. Every part of Ravenloft has a real-world parallel. So if you have a problem with the Vistani, you have a problem with the whole campaign setting, and this just illustrates the ignorance of the people people who are going about and complaining about this nonsense. You don't read Dungeons and Dragons books. You don't read the novels. You don't research anything. All you did is you saw some outrage going down on social media, and you wanted to go ahead and get those retweets and those likes. So you went ahead and started jumping on the clout bandwagon. But either way, now that that point has been completely and absolutely smashed into the goddamn ground like Godzilla rampaging through a metropolis, let's go ahead and look at how Wizards of the Coast is responding. Oh, would you look at that? They bent the knee. So Wizards of the Coast is going to go ahead and rewrite some books that we're about to put out.
All right.
I like how mid-rant he congratulates himself on crushing the point. Like, yeah, I did a good job. Conversation over. Smashed it like Godzilla. Anyway, I like how he, he's like, that's done. I've solved the problem. I've answered the question. You're all wrong. Now I'm going to bitch about something else. I wish I had this level of confidence.
I wish you did too. I do think here's an interesting thing is I do think sometimes reactionaries, not everything they say is made up, right? I think they're often right to identify the fact that Wizards responds kind of only to fan outrage instead of taking more proactive steps.
Yes.
And, it's like, yeah, they're right about that. They're wrong about maybe all of their other conclusions. Like, for example, in this video, right? You're just basically saying because some parts of Ravenloft are inspired by real world things like London and France that are not problematic, we can't also remove an obvious racist stereotype. Like, that's these two things are not related. You can keep parts of real world inspiration while removing things that are harmfully racist, right?
Right.
I mean, remember the Vistani are depicted as like evil, thieving drunkards who are described as uncivilized, superstitious, and have magical powers to curse and hypnotize you. It's straight, stereotypes of Romani from Gothic literature.
Played or run Ravenloft, but it's basically like they just can't be trusted, those Vistani. It's very like this was a much needed update to Ravenloft. For sure.
There's often the points that many of these videos, when they're not ranting, bring up is that if you have some kind of gender inclusive language, or let's say you remove things that reflect negative stereotypes or racism from our real world in your game, you're killing creativity or something like that. And this is like just such obvious bullshit. I mean, look at like Eberron, for example, or any of the thousands of other campaign settings that, don't rely on things like that and are way more creative. In fact, it's way less creative to just do this. Anyway. Yeah. All right, here's a softball for you, Rob. You mentioned why conservatives can't do comedy. I'm going to read you a headline from one small newspaper called the Babylon Bee.
Well, welcome back to Twitter, Babylon Bee. Yeah, congratulations.
Dungeons & Dragons introduces new 100-sided die for determining your character's gender.
Like, what's the joke, man?
There's one joke. Well, there's one joke.
What's like? I get the joke they're trying to make, but like, is it funny? I don't know. Like, I know it's not. I know it's just an opportunity for a bunch of conservatives to jump in the comments and be like, "Yeah, those SJWs are ruining everything," but they're not laughing. Are they having fun? Is this fun for them? I don't understand. Like, I do and I don't understand the reactionary mind.
I don't think it's fun for them, but I do think it titillates them in some way, in that they're imagining the fact that there is more than one or two gender identities, and that makes them mad.
That makes them mad, and it feels good to be mad at these people. Yeah, I guess that's it. But the thing is, it's not a joke. They're not funny. They're not jokes. They're just like, here's the thing to get mad at. But we framed it as a joke because that makes it easier.
Right, because Dungeons & Dragons doesn't actually have a table of 100 gender options.
Right.
It might be cool if they did.
It would be funny. See, it actually would be funny if they did do that. I think that would actually be kind of a funny bit, but not in the way that they think it would be funny.
Right. So this backlash has not just come at Wizards of the Coast. I feel like there are a lot of small creators, and I want to give one example, who kind of get hit with the shrapnel of a lot of this. So in June 6th of 2020, Sarah Thompson published a just short homebrew magic item, the Combat Wheelchair. And quoting from an article from ABC News Australia, when Miss Thompson released the Combat Wheelchair for D&D late last year, she was not prepared for the backlash. Quote, though I did have quite a lot of outpouring of support and love, there were still people who were very much set against it, she said. Unfortunately, that did turn into threats, whether they were generalized, very vague threats, or they were outright death threats.
I remember this.
It shows, I think, the idea how just anything that is outside of the norm just really, really threatens the fragility, I guess, of conservatives in their imagined position of private power.
Yeah, private power is good. I'm glad you brought in that that Corey Robin quote. It just, here's the thing. I read the Combat Wheelchair. It was neat. I personally wasn't sure I would ever have much use for it. I'm not sure any of my players would be interested in that. I think it's cool if you have a player who either does have a disability or doesn't and is interested in exploring this. What I cannot, under any circumstances, imagine is why you would care if that's not the case. Like, what does it matter to you? Why are you mad? Why would anyone be mad about this? You don't have to use it. It's a third-party supplement. This is another in the increasingly large list of things that boggle my mind. I'm like, why are you mad about this? Why do you even know about this? Like,
right.
You found this lovely Reddit thread, which is, I assume, from Kotaku in Action. I'm like, why did you find out about this? Why do you care? What does that have to do with anything?
I posted a bunch of comments here in our document, but I at this point I don't really feel like reading them. They're just like kind of like
it's
die. You know, you're entitled for wanting to put this in your game and stuff like that.
Sorry, I do want to read this one.
Sure, go ahead.
Because this illustrates another point that I was making earlier. So this is from some shithead on Reddit. And it's in response to the Combat Wheelchair, and he says, "That is so fucking toxic and entitled as fuck. No, I don't cure my disability. I want to be broken. I want to be a burden on myself and those around me. It makes me feel special. Fucking, this is so, you know what, I'm going to stop actually. This is just like really like loathsome. The point is, like, remember what I mentioned, they will love to use the language of progressivism, of inclusivity, right? To if they think it will gain them power. And if they can twist it and say, oh, actually, you're toxic. You're entitled for whatever thing, for wanting more inclusion, for wanting to be able to see yourself depicted in the game. Like, they love that. They cannot wait to turn around and call you, privileged in one way or another. And I'm not going to get too into this because we're going to see a lot of this in an upcoming section that Matt has prepared for us. But this whole thing with the combat, I remember this, and I remember it being really depressing for me. Honestly, this was like really...
Yeah, this is a kind of a low point.
It was a big major bummer. I was just like, why are you mad about this? Leave this poor person alone. If you don't like it, don't play with it. It's just don't be shitty. Yeah, this was just like this is a low point.
Right. The idea that someone who would want to play a character who is in a wheelchair somehow just viscerally offends people.
This reminds me, in Guild Wars 2, in one of the more, actually it's probably not that recent at this point, but last 5 years stories, there's a character who builds a golem because her legs don't work. I think she's unable to walk, and so she builds a golem to like carry her around. And she's I don't know. Some people don't like her because I don't know, she's young and annoying, but whatever. That's just like a thing, right? It's nice to have depictions of disabled characters. Like it allows you to play the game. It allows you to participate. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, why be mad about that?
All right, here is another clip that I think encapsulates. This is from this year, which, if you're listening to this in a later year, is the year 2022. And I think it embodies a lot of the current discourse that I've read and watched on the right.
The Coast also said it's adjusting material that maligns or stereotypes real-world ethnic groups like
Most
the
annoying
Roma.
voice. Sorry.
This is the problem right here. This is the problem. None of this ever had to be changed. None of it ever had to be changed because nobody ever thought like this. Real gamers don't think like this. Drow are historically evil. Orcs
Real
are
gamers.
historically evil. That's
Real
just
gamers,
what they
yeah.
are. Nobody needs to change their ability scores to be equal to human races, to be flexible. It's
Historically,
free
that's
to
what they
decide who
are.
They are as
They're
humans.
not real, dude.
They injected their own warped social justice ideology into the game, and that's how they look at it. Because remember, they look at the world through race, sexuality, and gender. Normal people don't think like that. We just want to play our games.
Normal
But it,
people.
does,
Normal
it
people.
didn't stop with this.
By
This
Sally
Coast
Rooney.
began it. They bent the knee immediately because they want the acceptance of the woke SJW crowd.
Yeah. I want
Okay, sorry.
to bring.
Now it's my
go ahead.
turn to destroy his argument like Godzilla pile driving a skyscraper. Hello, dude.
Oh, this is a different guy.
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm gonna do this new guy. The Drow have different stats than they did in second edition. Are you mad about that? Like, they historically don't have the same stats as they used to. Like, they changed it. Are you pissed? Are you pissed, dude? Whatever. Like, you know, he's only mad because, like, he's like, historically they were like this. You don't care what they were historically like. If they changed it for a reason that you agreed with, you would like that.
Yeah.
Dumb shit. Anyway, what were you gonna say?
All right. I was gonna say after this rant, I think it's like the newest challenger has entered the rooms, and we've seen some currents about this really from the beginning, from outside gaming, but from inside it as well. Here we go.
Inject their warp world views, their skewed perception of reality into something that doesn't harbor any of that. They only want to tear down. This isn't about creating. This isn't about equality. It isn't about diversity and inclusion. This is about control. They want to control how you think and how you play, because if you get them while they're young, a Marxist tenant, when you get them while they're young, you can indoctrinate them and get them to think the way you want to. And that's what this is all about. This is all about controlling the youth. Because that's where the creativity starts. I said this before. The creativity.
So, Rob, you read that in your Marxist handbook, right?
I did.
Marxism is about children.
Yes, exactly. That's the second sentence of the Communist Manifesto is, you know, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of youth, and you need to control them and indoctrinate them with Marxism. Here's how. That's what the Communist Manifesto is about.
I thought this was illustrative just for the fact that in a sense, like we've come full circle in that, like, we started talking about the Satanic Panic and Dungeons and Dragons corrupting children. These were made by people outside of gaming. And we went through a cycle where reactionaries identified with the victims of the Satanic Panic. And now it's flipped on its head, where the social justice warriors are the ones going after our pure children and corrupting them with their ideology, introducing them to diversity and other ways of life, I guess.
Well, and this is reflective of the broader war within the right. Like the alliance between the pro.
Oh, Rob, did you say war?
I did say war. Sorry.
This is a war, my friends. This is a war.
Gotcha.
A culture war. We are fighting it. It is happening on all levels. And right here, it's been going on for a few years now. But we've been so wrapped up in trying to defend Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel,
We have been wrapped
DC,
up on that.
all across the entire war front. This one has slipped through, and I doubt people are really seeing what's going on.
So
yes, you're right, Rob. It is a war.
Well, it's reflective of a broader war within the American right. And for the last 60 years or so, there has been a tacit agreement between the pro-business, kind of more libertarian right and the conservative, religious, cultural right. And that is beginning to break down because this is what you saw in the peak of, Gamergate, which most of those people are apolitical, reactionary. There were a lot of really people who didn't know any better involved, and they all fell off, and they tried the right tried to bridge this gap, and it didn't work, right? And now the true conservatives, the true right-wingers, have realigned themselves with the cultural conservatives because that's what the core of the right is. And yeah, now they cannot pretend to be pro gamer.
Right. I think it's interesting in that from a reactionary perspective, this is like a war where you have to deploy your resources. And
Yes.
There's been so many reactionaries talking about Star Wars or Disney. And I guess if you're fans of those, I have sort of heard my bits filter through. I heard a lot of people were upset about John Boyega in Star Wars or the main character of the new trilogy being a woman, or that there's a black actor in a Disney movie or a mermaid film or something like that. I hear these things, but I'm not part of those communities, so I don't have to hear about it. But this idea that we have to marshal our resources now to deploy on the gaming front again.
Well, and to bring in another famous quote about conservatism is, as our boy William F. Buckley said, a conservative is someone who stands athwart history yelling "stop," and that's what these people are doing. Except now that they're spread too thin, they can't yell "stop" at comic books and movies and anime and TTRPGs at all the same time. There's not enough of them yelling "stop."
Right. Rob, here's actually, of all the people we've listened to, I think the one with maybe the most annoying voice. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge.
Oh boy.
Sorry, this is a reaction to the Strixhaven book. The title is A Pro Fantasy Writer's Reaction to D&D's Bizarre SJW Harry Potter Prom.
Of the way that they would love for reality to actually be rather than anything else. So when you're going into a science fiction or fantasy world, it just feels weird and doesn't feel right because there isn't realism involved in that. You're supposed to have John Carter, leaping over giant thousands of miles because, the gravity's lower and he's a superhuman on the planet. You're supposed to have Conan the Barbarian just tearing through hordes of undead, by the hundreds because it's a fantasy and you're supposed to enjoy the strength. You're supposed to enjoy the violence. You're supposed to enjoy all the fun that you can't have in real life. So when you bring something to real life for any normal person, I've already gone to prom a lot of times when I was in high school, and
Good for you.
Most of you probably have too. So you don't really need to re-experience that sort of life because you've already got a life, and that's the difference between the SJW sort of fake escapism into reality versus the escapism that normal people want to have with their fun. But it all really stems from...
Rob, is it woke to have a party in your D&D game?
I guess so. I'm sorry. I know this guy. This is John Del Arrows.
Really?
And he has beef with a bunch of other science fiction authors, including John Scalzi, who muted him on Twitter, and now he's taking that as a vendetta. I don't want to gatekeep being a science fiction author, but describing himself as a pro fantasy author is it's technically true. I think most of his stuff is self-published. One of his books is called Deus Vult, by the way. Also, he sued Worldcon a couple of times. I assume over sad puppies related or downstream from that. Anyway, I apologize. I didn't really hear any of the stupid shit he was saying because
he's not a big RPG author, right? Would you say?
I don't think so. Not that I
Here's
know.
my point is that now we have this industry on the right.
Oh,
where
yes.
Whenever a D&D book is published, there is something in it that can be identified as SJW, as woke. That is just another reason why we are under attack. And like, Strixhaven, we reviewed it. You can listen to our review on the show. It's a very different type of adventure. There's a lot of structural problems with how it's written, but there's nothing fundamentally.
But it was
there's nothing fundamentally wrong about running a game where you're students in a school. Like, that's super cool. That's fine.
Yeah, it's such a weird. I mean, yeah, no, that's not something that's normally part of D&D. But speaking of creativity, there's no reason why it couldn't be. Like, lots of D&D properties going back for decades have included trials. They've included galas or balls. That's a classic D&D trope, infiltrating a masquerade ball to meet the. Sorry, you told me to wrap it up.
It's okay. Yeah, I'm just like, we talked about this. We got
anyway,
a little more to get.
The point I'm making here is he's dumb. He's wrong. A prom is no different than any of those things. That's what I'm saying.
All right. Now, Rob, I said the last one had a very annoying voice. This guy may have the most annoying voice. This is in response to a book we also reviewed, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel. And this video is titled D&D Brags About New Book Written Entirely by, quote, Black and Brown People. Because, of course.
Diversity. It is a word that quite simply means the absence of whitey. Back in the day, I feel like we had another word for including and or excluding people based on their skin color, but, oh well, those were the good old days when we considered racial discrimination to be a bad thing. How far we have come. As Dungeons & Dragons' next anthology is written entirely by black and brown authors, and this is a positive thing, a very diverse thing, I'm sure, as the idea for all of this came from Ajit George, who just couldn't shake the idea of a whole book written by black and brown authors. Coincidentally, entirely coinky-dinky-winky, Ajit George is an Indian himself, and the fact that this was a way to guarantee himself more work, of course, never crossed his mind. Obviously, natürlich.
See, now this guy, this is the Archcast.
Yep.
He, he's got a good voice, got a good presentation style. The British accent doesn't hurt. Here's the thing: if I must listen to your right wing horse shit, at least be interesting to listen to. Sorry, that's it. That's all I got.
At least be a character. Here we're implying that Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel was just like a way for people who are not white to scam work out of Wizards of the Coast. I mean, that was his implication at the end of that
a strong implication,
minute-long rant. Let's hear how he really feels.
Finally, we've known this for a long time, that diversity no longer means what the word is intended to mean, rather it has become a political term, a buzzword used to mean we want more people of the correct skin color and less of the people who were born wrong to do the thing. And we are going to give them money and power and prestige to do that thing. Because we are enormous racists, as it turns out. But again, it's always nice to have the actual evidence presented to you, isn't it?
Rob, this is just a simple point that many reactionaries make. It's the idea of reverse racism, right? It's that if we're giving opportunities to people who are normally excluded, that's actually discriminating against white people. It's actually way worse than regular racism.
Yes. Well, real racism isn't real, but reverse racism is real. And that's the issue.
This is not a thing. Most D&D books and most 5e D&D books have been written by white authors, right? Not exclusively, but the vast majority, right? I just want to also point out it's clear Arch never played this game or read through the whole book, because he goes on a rant later on in the video, I won't make you listen to it, where he makes fun of the cover of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, and he describes the cover as being part of the Radiant Citadel. You and I know that the cover art on this book is taken from the first adventure, not from the Radiant Citadel. So just, again, fake gamer.
Fake gamer. I hesitate to even bother to respond to this because reverse racism is a thing that, I mean, it is first trotted out to deal with affirmative action and has been used anytime anybody tries to make the world any more equal. And I do think that some reactionaries believe it because they're dumb. I think, however, that most of them think that they can score points by saying, aha, you're the real racist, by creating an anthology that's written only by black and brown people. You see, because you excluded white people. Haha, my logical conundrum has you trapped. Sorry, now I'm talking like the arch
Yeah, I know.
He infected me with his sonorous voice. I gotta say, at least he was nice to listen to.
I will divorce you if you put on an affect like that guy.
We present orcs and drow in a new light in two of our most recent books, Eberron Rising from the Last War and Explorer's Guide to... I'm going to say it wrong. Wildemount. Wildemount. In those books, orcs and drow are just as morally and culturally complex as other peoples. This is from the Wizard's Statement on Diversity, or Diversity in Dungeons and Dragons.
Rob,
I want to. Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wizards is very cheeky here, taking credit for other non-WotC writers creating more morally complex worlds. Like Eberron is a Keith Baker, setting, and Wildemount is a Matt Mercer setting. Like, yes, they published them, but taking credit for the more morally and culturally complex orcs is, anyway, this is a good example of what Matt called the tripping over their dicks era of Wizards. Again, it's fine. They're correct, but like, I don't know, man, you didn't do anything. But go on. Sorry. Right. Not the point.
Rob, we've reached the final stage of, I think, of ingredients into this stew of right-wing and reactionary anger about modern Dungeons and Dragons. And it's a stew that is made like basically WotC a main target, but also like a lot of the new people who have come in to role-playing games as a target of right-wing ire. And let's talk about this specific part of the statement and why, from our perspective, it makes so much sense. The idea of having sentient, always evil races in a fantasy setting, like, why is that bad?
Well, this is actually a really interesting question, and people much smarter than me have written and spoken about this at length. But the idea of clear genetic and like predisposition among races is clearly like, this is an offshoot of scientific racism, of eugenics and, late Enlightenment ideas about race and inherited traits. And most explicitly, it gives permission.
Blood libel, too, from the middle.
Blood libel, right. Yeah, no, it goes back to, it goes back much later than that, but it has its roots in, or I think it has its strongest roots in modern racism. And it gives explicit permission to not just dismiss those individuals of that race, but also genocide them, to kill them, to, it makes it okay and safe to murder goblins and orcs and hobgoblins and ogres and whatever, who are sentient beings, but because they are labeled evil, it is okay to murder them wantonly, up to and including children, women, non-combatants. This is an explicit, this follows, right, from the idea that they are inherently evil. And we will see, Matt has some choice quotes about this.
But Rob, we're just talking about We're just talking about a fantasy story that we're telling in our heads, right? This is not the real world.
This is a very common argument, and it's stupid for reasons that we'll get into later. But I also want to make the point, and this is now 3 episodes ago, but again, the originator of the fantasy races idea, J.R.R. Tolkien himself knew that there was a problem with this, right? He struggled with this idea. I don't think that he intended, when he wrote Lord of the Rings, for orcs to be, irredeemably evil. Or if he did, he regretted that later. But the sort of enthusiasm with which Gygax and his ideological descendants seized upon the idea that orcs and related races were just irredeemable savages took it entirely out of his hands. I think that, again, I'm such like a Tolkien defender on this pod, but I think but what frustrates me is that while you can blame Tolkien for a lot of things, it is people who came after who really turned, I guess, fantasy races into fantasy racism. And this is kind of what we were talking about with how games, are involved in cultural reproduction. But there's a part of me that deeply fears that Dungeons & Dragons and its offshoots in World of Warcraft and just every fantasy novel and property have reinforced the idea of biological essentialism, like the idea that
determinism,
the idea that race is real and that there are traits that are inherent. Like I have this deep fear that nerds have internalized this concept, like worse than they might have otherwise if D&D were not so, even though not that many people play D&D relatively, it is, the role-playing game is now a core cultural concept in the West, right? Every video game, we have apps that are gamified, like this idea of everyone has been
everything has
exposed
stats now.
Everything has stats, right? We've all been exposed to this, even if you're not a gamer. No, that's true. I'm not joking. So sorry, this is one of my great and deep fears, is that D&D has done intense damage in normalizing this false idea about race and about biological determinism. Sorry, you asked a question and it went off the rails.
It's fine. The idea that okay, but also wait, this is just fantasy stories.
Right.
I will say there's some truth to that, right? Role-playing games are not the real world, but why would you not want to examine the thing that you're so passionate about? Why would you not want to examine and think critically about what you spend your time doing, right? It seems to me that if you dismiss that, oh, hey, it's just a story, it's like, do you never think about the movies you watch, the conversations you have with other people, the books you read? Do you not have any critical thinking skills at all? And if you do, then why not think critically about games? And why not tell better, more interesting stories that don't, let's say, reinforce ideas of biological racism, which are deeply rooted in fantasy, whether it's Tolkien's fault or Robert E. Howard or Gary Gygax, right? We could maybe do better. And I think, Rob, you mentioned 2 of the most popular 5e settings, Eberron and Wildemount, have done a better job of this. And orcs, for example, in Eberron are 1,000 times more interesting than they are in Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms.
For decades, it has been common and unremarkable for sports fans to aggressively criticize the ownership, the coaches, the players, the advertising, every element of their favorite team, right? You ask any sports fan about their favorite franchise, what they're doing wrong, and they will talk your ear off. And nobody says, well, you can't, you're just, you can't criticize that. Why don't you just shut up and watch football? But as soon as you want your games to be better in a certain way, you're not a real fan. You're bringing politics in. It's
completely disingenuous. I mean,
yes.
If you listen to the last 2.5 episodes of this podcast, the right loves nothing more than criticizing Dungeons & Dragons, right?
Right. They love it.
It's just from a place of reaction, right? And, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong inherently with critiquing what's going on and discussing it, right? And they only pull out this argument when when they don't like the criticism. Rob, what about, okay, let's start with the like lowest hanging fruit here. And we've done a more in-depth episode on this with scholar Paul Stuyvesant.
It's okay.
And
Paul's a friend of the show. He'll forgive us.
yes, thank you, Paul. The drow. There has not been, so I looked around after WotC released this statement about, hey, the drow being inherently evil, that's problematic. We're going to look to fixing that in the future. There was not a huge or as big of a backlash about this. And I'm curious if you have any ideas on why you think that is.
Well, I had a theory, right? And my theory is that generally this is trolling, that reactionaries are being disingenuous because they know exactly what you're saying, and they know that you have a point. They just disagree, and they don't care. So the thing with drow is that it's undeniable, right? They are irredeemably, awfully demon-worshipping evil elves, and their skin is black. Like, you have to be extremely
cursed by the gods to have
black
skin color,
which is really like Mark of Cain type stuff. Tribe of
Curse of Ham.
Sorry. Real like biblical, like black people are doomed to suffer and to be evil type stuff. So like you have to be acting like a real idiot to claim that, I don't see what's wrong with that. Like nobody's going to buy that. The difference with orcs is that to some people, it seems plausibly deniable, right? You can say, well, I just don't see what's racist about this. If you see orcs as other, as Asian, as black, then that's you. That's being racist. But drow is just impossible, in my opinion.
It's impossible to deny.
To deny. That's my theory about why there wasn't a lot of objection to drow being changed.
On the flip side, even though it's just mentioned in passing along with drow, there was a huge right-wing posting and YouTube backlash to the idea that you could have a campaign setting or that in future D&D materials, orcs would not be described as inherently evil, right? And that only maybe a few exceptions that were a credit to their race would exist. Here's one example. I'm going to do my nerd voice and read a post from a right-wing Twitter account. D&D genuinely thinks the difference between white and black people are the same as the differences between an elf and an orc. How is that not racist?
I am so fucking sick of these self-obsessed racist, and then there's a lot of asterisks on either side of this word, woke white people treating anybody non-white like these pathetic, quivering, subhuman things that need to be constantly coddled and condescended to. And then beneath that is a Wojak, and the soy face Wojak is saying, D&D is getting rid of the concept of evil races. Orcs aren't inherently evil, just like you guys. And then there is a black Wojak that says, wait, you think I look like an orc? You got me. Hoisted by my own petard.
Right.
Mort.
Here's the basic idea of the right-wing argument that's been popular now for 2 years, right? Is that now woke people, progressives, the libtards, the SJWs are saying that orcs represent black people. And actually, of course, by saying that, progressives are the real racists, right? Haha. Your obsession with race has made you the real racist. Okay, let's deconstruct this argument.
Again, I think most of this is playing dumb. But if you are the type of person who doesn't want to think too deeply about anything, especially your hobbies, then if somebody points out to you, hey, this art makes this evil race look kind of like a minority group, and that's an issue, then you might be like, well, I don't see that. They're just wearing a loincloth. What's the big deal? Like, lots of people wear loincloths. And their progressives will often overreach on this, but when you point out something like, hey, all these Disney villains are explicitly gay coded, and then you're like, well, yeah, they kind of are. They all they're all kind of, vaguely effeminate and mincing, and I'm like, you know, what's the deal with that? Like, why does the merchant at the beginning of Aladdin have like a big bulbous nose, and why does Aladdin himself look like a handsome, just like a tan white guy? Like, you know, but if you are expressly not interested in this argument, you can be like, well, you're just seeing that, right? I don't know, man. I guess it is possible that you just don't see that, but even if you don't see it, I believe that we are influenced by, you know, the images that we see and the words that we read and the culture that we are raised and exposed to. And so even if you are genuinely, truly, consciously ignorant of the way that certain, you know, fictional entities are portrayed and how that might impact your thinking about real world races, that doesn't matter. And you know, it is possible to go too far on this, but it is something that I think we should take very seriously. But the argument against it is that, well, I just don't see that. You're making this shit up. Nowhere does it say orcs are black people, so you're a racist. And I suppose on a certain level, that makes sense. I don't agree. I think it's wrong. I think it's dumb. I think it's disingenuous, but
it's disingenuous for a couple of reasons, which I don't think anyone was arguing that orcs represent black people. There were a lot of thoughtful critiques that pointed out that orcs, you know, in Tolkien, have often been described as people of Asian descent. That in D&D lore, orcs are described as like a warrior race, and that the main problem is that they're often described with words like uncivilized and savage, and that the warrior race thing is a major trope of how colonists described colonized peoples, right?
Correct.
And so no one is making a one-to-one comparison in the case of orcs with, you know, how racism functions in the real world. They're saying that orcs as an evil race that have to be evil and have no other choice are playing on basically, you know, 200 years of colonialist ideas about the other.
Right. And you pulled a good quote from Video Dante here, who really...
Why don't you read that?
And Video Dante says, the problem with D&D orc racial classification is not that orcs were necessarily designed to resemble black and or POC cultures, but that the ideology of this group of sentient beings is unable to overcome the inherent animal nature of their bloodline is the same as real life racism, which I think is the root problem. I do want to say, though, that even though it's not always explicit, I bet that if we did the same type of art analysis as the author of that paper on how orcs are depicted for the past 40 years, they're going to appear, how many times are they depicted as knights in shining armor as compared to savage barbarians, right? And how many times are humans depicted as paladins or even, you know, well-dressed mercenaries or something? Like there is an explicit alignment of orcs with a certain tribal, colonial, you know, non-white, non-Western, you know, otherized. And sometimes it's more based on, you know, steppe hordes or something. And sometimes it's more based on African tribes, and sometimes, but it's always or almost always, right, a colonized or marginalized group.
This idea that like evil races exist and they should be killed goes back to one of the co-authors of Dungeons and Dragons, Gary Gygax, you know, had many writings which confirmed that he believed in this kind of idea of biological determinism. Until his death, he was a frequent poster on forums, and I wanted to highlight this forum post in which Gary Gygax talks about how an eye for an eye justice and the murder of evil races is basically lawful and good according to the alignment system of D&D. And Rob, do you want to read that last paragraph in your best Gygax voice?
Chevington might have been quoted as saying nits make lice, but he is certainly not the first one to make such an observation, as it is an observable fact. If you have read the account of Wooden Leg, a warrior of the Cheyenne tribe that fought against Custer et al., he dispassionately noted killing an enemy squaw for the reason in question. Cheers, Gary.
Gary Gygax here is quoting John Chivington, who was a Civil War officer and a veteran of basically the American genocide of American Indian tribes. And the full quote reads, a longer version of the quote reads, "Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp them all, big and little. Nits make lice." Colonel John Milton Chivington. And he was responsible, one of the many people responsible for the Sand Creek Massacre. Massacre of Cheyenne and Arapaho people that was like so egregious that it like actually got investigated by the American government.
Not only is this not a good man, this is a very bad man. Like a truly awful, like a genocidaire. Like this man is responsible personally for the deaths of dozens, hundreds of Native Americans, including women and children. That doesn't mean that you can't like quote somebody like that, but it is, again, I don't know, this is something you could be canceled for, in my opinion. Gary Gygax is canceled for this shit. He's canceled for other shit, but this is, I don't know, man. Anybody who does not find the American treatment of Native Americans in the 19th century like truly just beyond the pale is suspect in my mind. So, but Matt makes a good point that this is an underlying. It's not just it's explicit that you can and should murder all orcs, goblins, bugbears, whatever. It's a whole host of evil races, drow, and that's not only acceptable but lawful and good. We read an excerpt from a Dragon magazine where this came up briefly. You know, it's just sort of like one of those assumptions you have to follow logically, right? If there are evil races, then you should murder them all. I think that we have progressed as a society to understanding like why that's bad, but we have not progressed as far as I would like. You know, it's still something I think that we say in the gaming space especially kind of take for granted that there are races that are evil. Also, sorry, this is a real kind of like nerd tangent, but in D&D and most fantasy settings, you can interbreed between orcs and humans and mostly across all humanoid races, which means they are not distinct species. I'm sort of like gray area on killing sentient evil aliens. You know, I can see that, but these are not aliens, right? These are humanoids that share a fantasy background, and that makes it already killing wantonly sentient beings is questionable and problematic. But this is increasingly and doubly so, and that's why it's also sort of reinforces in real life racism, like Video Dante says.
Right. I'm nowhere near smart enough to give the best comment on this, but you know, scholars like Barbara Fields have talked about how the idea of race as a real category, real in the sense that it's not socially constructed or like in a way like produce racism. Like the ideas about race produce in our culture racism, and you know, maybe Dungeons & Dragons shouldn't participate in that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people are kind of asking or questioning about, and it could be a lot better. So, you know, back to our right-wing reactionaries, this idea that WotC or woke SJWs, which are now merging into the same thing, are taking away our evil races, is just... It has caused, I've read hundreds of posts of like, I will never buy a WotC product again. I'm off. I'm doing my own thing. I'm going back to, I'm playing Lamentations of the Flame Princess now, right? I'm playing OSR games. I'm playing only second edition. A lot of nostalgia for when TSR ran the company, forgetting how poorly they managed.
Yeah, how badly they did. Yeah. This is so funny to me, because they're just so mad at the idea that someone is taking something away from them. And again, I think this is very telling. Nobody can make them do anything in their home game. Nobody is stopping them from treating orcs exactly the same as they have for the last 30 or 40 years. But the very idea that somebody might have a problem with that, and that they've been forced to
think about it.
Makes them furious. Makes them so mad that they won't even, that they'll boycott, they'll rant and rave. And I don't know, I read things that annoy me sometimes too. Sometimes companies do things that I think are quite obnoxious to properties I care very deeply about. But that is what it's like living in the world that we live in. And it's this sort of reactionary rage, I just think is very telling, because it's the idea that just the existence of this argument, this idea about orcs, has ruined something for them. That they can never, participate in the hobby the way that they used to. And I think that's quite telling.
We heard earlier in the episode just how mad this makes people on the right. People calling for firebombing of Hasbro, baseball bats to kneecaps of people producing this. And it is like we talked about, right? This just sort of this private power in what we thought was our space is being challenged in some way. But as we mentioned, WotC is not blameless here, right? We've chronicled on this podcast, and I don't think we have time to go into all of the missteps they have made as a company in handling these types of situations. And just this year, this is 2022, WotC released a new supplement for Dungeons & Dragons in the Spelljammer campaign setting, a campaign setting that is 30 years old. And when updating this for the newest edition of Dungeons & Dragons, they released a set of lore and art for a race of playable characters called the Hadozee. The Hadozee are nicknamed in the lore deck apes. They look like monkeys with kind of a sugar glider or flying squirrel flaps of skin. What they released about the Hadozee was, I think we could call it #problematic.
Right. We didn't talk about this at length because when it was happening, people smarter than us and people with more authority to speak on it had addressed it pretty well. But in the in the new edition of Spelljammer, they had added this bit of lore about the Hadozee homeworld. Basically that a bunch of wizards enslaved all the Hadozee, and then they came to like them and helped them escape. And then the Hadozee were cheerful slaves of some sort, that they were, I don't know. This was not in the original Spelljammer.
It was not in the original Spelljammer in the exact same way. And it was also not even in the preview of the race that was released in the playtest Unearthed Arcana version. It was kind of new stuff, along with some art that in many ways evoked minstrel caricatures that have been popular in the United States over the last 200 years. Really kind of drove home that while WotC said a lot of things about treating races in the game with maybe a little more thoughtful consideration, they fumbled the bag in a huge way.
Well, I think this is important to dwell on for just a moment, because I don't think for a moment that Wizards sat down and said, we're going to make the Hadozee a racist caricature of black people and black slaves. But if you're not conscious and careful about this, that's what's so pervasive and sinister about racism, is that it just pops up, right? You can just accidentally do a racism if you're not trying. Like, this is why people say you need to be anti-racist. Like, it's not just enough to be not racist. You have to be actively and deliberately anti-racist. And this makes a lot of people mad, but this is a great point, because no, I don't believe for a second that Wizards did this on purpose, but their carelessness here is exactly the kind of carelessness which perpetuates racist stereotypes in the first place. We should be explicit. Like, it's a long-running and very well documented trope that comparing black people to apes, chimpanzees, primates is a racist stereotype. It's been around in the US, in Europe, and it persists to this day. And pretending like you don't know that is, again, I find that just unbelievable. And a lot of conservatives will do it, and I think it's fucking stupid. We should not take those people seriously.
There were so many things wrong with this, not only just the art and the connections with slavery, it's just like how those were expressed, right? We have in Dungeons & Dragons another species, race, the Githyanki and the Githziri, that in their backstory were slaves for millennia. But in their story, right, they had a rebellion. They freed themselves, and they hunt those who enslaved them. And the Hadozee, didn't have that kind of lore, or wouldn't allow you as a character playing a Hadozee to express that agency. They were saved from slavery by someone else. There's also all kinds of things about how they enjoy doing good and happy work, that they show deference to elves, but act normally when outside their presence. Just kind of so many unintentional, I think I agree with you here, but very pernicious racist tropes got into this lore. And people were kind of surprised about it because, yeah, it kind of wasn't in the origins of Hadozee from their Star Traveler or Star days, right? And it wasn't in the Unearthed Arcana, and people were like, hey, you should change this. And WotC did. But the idea that this controversy comes up and that WotC makes a change, right, this was infuriating to people on the right. That WotC is, once again, we heard this phrase many times before, and we hear it again with this one, bending the knee to progressives or social justice warriors that want to destroy something.
This brings us to basically to the present day. And do you think we're ready to maybe start driving toward
let's
a conclusion? There's more to say about the Hadozee controversy, and there are other controversies, but it's all the same controversy. I hope that we have demonstrated the through line of reactionary thought from, and it goes back much further than the 1980s, but I think that there's a real, a clear line from the Satanic Panic to the present, and especially running through Sad Puppies and Gamergate. But yeah, it's all the same reaction.
Yeah, I hesitate to what we've put together is really a history, in that it's more of a tracing of the thought in the current moment, right? We have not included many of the racist things from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s by Dungeons & Dragons fans or creators. We're just trying to show the origins of what the screaming tirades that we've listened to this episode and the past two, where they're kind of coming from. I think I want to say two quick things about where the right is today, right? Is they're very into seeking protected spaces where their views are not judged or commented on or criticized. One of my favorite things that happened in this last year is a more right-leaning role-playing game forum, the RPG site, released a red, green, yellow woke scale of role-playing game makers, so that you, with your good capitalist dollars, can only support creators who have the same beliefs as you. And if you look at the scale, nearly every company, and certainly 95% of the companies that are fairly popular or make games that lots of people play, is in the red zone, as in they are woke, they are progressive. And, right-wingers are isolating themselves to a smaller and smaller section of the gaming land. One of the funny things that happened when the woke scale was published is many creators went out of their way to say, hey, actually, yeah, please put us on the red section. We're woke too.
Oh, God, this is such a funny list. In red are, of course, Wizards, Paizo, Onyx Path, Roll20, Evil Hat Productions, Green Ronin, Kobold Press. Though hilariously, I just noticed this. I've read this multiple times, but Varg Vikernes is on the red because they have to be like, oh shit, we better include a Nazi in the red section so that they know that we're not, we're not just reactionaries. No, we're against all politics in games, including Nazi politics. But they've also they gave Mike Pondsmith a pass because I guess he wasn't, because he got criticized by what they call the woke mob at one point. They gave Catalyst a pass, and I'm like, it just feels kind of arbitrary. Like all of these games have woke elements in them. Like you can change your gender all over the place in Cyberpunk and Shadowrun, but whatever. This is a feels based list in my opinion. There's no rigor to this rating system.
Yeah, no, there's no rigor at all, and I just I love that they really showed their hand when it's not just about it's not about politics, it's about woke. But for example, here in my home state of Texas, Steve Jackson Games, which makers of Munchkin, Illuminati, Car Wars, many other games. For example, after the disaster that has followed Texans after our legislatures, banning of abortion after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, like Steve Jackson Games donated a ton of money to the abortion funds and pledged to make sure all of their employees, as best as possible, will have access to reproductive health care. And, doesn't have anything to do with their games, right?
Right.
But that put them on the naughty list because, that's against it's political, right? So it's not about the games. It's, are your politics aligning with ours? Okay, we will only give you money if that's the case. I also joined, Rob. I was interested in, and this is perhaps it's sad because it's the last thing we're going to talk about, but it's maybe the least interesting, is what's going on in conservative only spaces. I was able to sneak my way into several conservative Facebook groups with titles like Dungeons and Dragons, all caps, non-political, or old school gaming. Explicitly says, if you are woke, if you are an SJW, you are not allowed into this group. If you post about politics or politics and games, you can't come in here. And at the end of the day, the conversations that reactionaries have amongst themselves are no different than your conservative uncle that posts on Facebook. It's a lot of decrying politics and gaming. It's a lot of whining about how blue-haired SJWs need their safe spaces. Rob, I think I'll just read you just a single post that I feel like best encapsulates what I was reading in these private conservative Dungeons and Dragons Facebook groups. Quote, I think I've reached my limit of all this cultural appropriation and cancellation. Gamers under 35 don't get to judge or hate old school gamers. We endured years of ridicule, isolation, bullying, physical torment, mental abuse, loss of friendships, lack of significant relationships with non-gamers, a society that called us devil worshippers, deviants, psychotics, hearing parents of friends scold us and inform us that we could no longer play with their kids just because of our hobby, and no sanctuary that we could call home in regular society. For over 35 years, we have kept D&D alive. We've endured the worst abuse so that current generations can even get a taste of what we love. Are we productive? Absolutely. If you don't like our game, its rules, or our culture, that's okay. Go make your own game. But if you want to be part of the amazing hobby that role-playing games are, then learn that we were here first. We accepted it, we influenced it, and we kept it alive. Don't come to us and tell us we need a change. Quit trying to steal our hobby. We suffered so much to keep close to our hearts. Maybe a passing fad and novelty to you, but for others, it's a whole chapter of our lives. Okay, I mean, so that's maybe a little hyperbolic, but it encapsulates this idea that Dungeons and Dragons, these old school or conservative gamers, feel like this is their hobby. They suffered for it. They kept it alive. And I mean, I just sort of, in my own experience, feel like the opposite's true, in that a lot of people who have this attitude basically nearly killed Dungeons and Dragons by just driving people out. And I guess that's maybe just kind of the more general trend here, is there's a lot of people in these forums who, maybe feel isolated and, let's say a very frightening, new and exciting group of people coming into the game, and they say, That's why no one plays with me anymore. That's why I feel isolated. It's not me with my incredibly toxic personality. It's these new people who must be the problem. The groups have in many ways quickly fallen apart as one moderator got banned, and so a group has no moderator. Another another decided that he needed to devote his life to religion and gave up gaming entirely. And the non-political one, the post that I read right before we recorded this episode, was specifically about the 2020 election in the United States, and how could America choose John Fetterman over Dr. Oz. Sort of the irony that in a non-political group, the main discussion is about our beloved red wave.
I'm glad that you did this, Matt, though I'm sorry that you had to. And I don't ultimately think that it was a good use of your time. But now
Terrible use of my time.
Now we know, right? I mean, this is not everywhere that they're gathering. Like, what is it? The 4chan forum TG is still a pretty big place for this, and they have Reddit forums. But like, these Facebook groups are private, and this is where they feel the most comfortable. And truthfully, what's happening there is just a bunch of whining. Matt has shared a lot of the screenshots and the comments, and
it's just people complaining that someone drew a sexy hobgoblin.
Yeah, they're just upset, about wokes. They're upset about having to think about this stuff. They're upset about politics. They're upset about cancel culture. I
mean, some of it is truly pernicious. There's a large thread about how what if we all started a campaign where the gay, I'm quoting here, the gay, trans, etc. were a cult that was seeking world domination and needed to be defeated. Another commenter talks about, yes, my players work for the Path of the Golden Dawn, a Nazi organization out of Greece, and they fight the Order of the Rainbow and stuff. It's just, some of it's really, really hateful. Most of it, as you said, is just feeling left out, that new people are in the hobby and they're drawing sexy art of things that didn't used to be sexy.
And they love to insist that this is apolitical, right? Like, thank God for this group that's not political. I hate politics in my games. And then they complain about trans people or women or something. And it's, it is very pernicious, and it is a lot of it's quite disgusting, but it's mostly just pathetic.
Most of the discussion is in fact political. It is about SJWs or
right.
Trans people or like women playing the game, or about the fact that Republicans didn't win a Senate race in Pennsylvania.
Well, and this brings me, this is probably like my final point on the subject. There's so much more to say, but we could talk about it forever. But the more we talk about this and the more I look into this, and again, because I have a stupid brain and I care more about being right, not about being right. I care more about understanding than about winning or being right. I genuinely try to understand these people because I they share some ideological DNA with me, and that they like the same games that I like. So I try to understand them. And the thing that I have come to after all these episodes and all this research and all this reading and years of listening to these people talk is it just does not seem like they like gaming very much. And they don't like gaming because they're no longer in charge. I think the only thing that they liked about tabletop role-playing games is that it was their space. Like, they didn't particularly like the game. They just liked that it was something they could do with the boys, and nobody would bother them. Like, they might be just as happy playing poker or watching football. They just happened to seize upon Dungeons and Dragons, and that really sucks, in my opinion. Like, they're furious about these changes, but it doesn't really seem like they care that much about the game. And for all of our flaws, all of my flaws, I really do care about this hobby. I really do care about the games. I have chosen this and spent a lot of my life on it because it brings me great joy. And so I treat it very seriously. And if all of a sudden, I don't know, it were run by Nazis or reactionaries or conservatives, I would not give them my money, but I would continue to play tabletop role-playing games because that genuinely brings me joy. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing, and I would continue to try to make my games better and more interesting and more inclusive. And that, that really, like, I'm glad we did this, but it just saps my energy to continue to give these people any credence because it just doesn't feel like they care about the game. They're just mad because their thing is not just their thing anymore, which is it's just pathetic.
I think the attitude is, I think there's probably a feeling among many right wingers, and we have evidence that I think supports this, that there would be, like Gamergate or like the sad puppies, there would be a rising up, and maybe, recognizing that a lot of the people who play D&D and role-playing games now are not on the political right. They're not reactionaries. They're not just white men, that there would be, a massive schism, and, maybe their side would be as big as the other side. There was attempts by some of the creators and fans that we heard videos or read quotes from here to start hashtag D&D Gate or hashtag RPG Gate. And those just never took off. They I almost, forgot to mention them. Like, they gained so little traction compared to things like the Sad Puppies or Gamergate. And I think there's just a lot of disappointment that the people making the most exciting role-playing game art, rules, maps, actual plays, adventures are just not in line with their political views or their vision of the space. And so, since there's not that many exciting games coming out from right-wing creators, they just feel left out. Right. Mm-hmm. And yes, they have no joy because of it.
That's exactly right.
I think one of the, one of the things that, like, truly, so I don't think we're about to see Gamergate for role-playing games take off. One of the things that did give me pause were several comments on YouTube videos, on right-wing sites, talking about the fact that, there's for a long time now, teachers and other people have played role-playing games with children. And WotC, for example, has provided starter sets for that. There were several comments that I saw that were like, oh yeah, these came to my kids' schools. Is a teacher trying to, corrupt them and stuff like that? So I think, I don't think it's going to happen. But, I don't give it a 0% chance of there being a right-wing push to cancel D&D, for example, in schools, right? I don't think that's going to happen, but I think it's a possibility.
This is worth mentioning because this is one of the through lines and this is one of those things where I get so frustrated because it's so obviously false, and I get annoyed that I'm supposed to pretend to take it seriously, but a false concern for children. And they'll be like, oh, you can't expose children to this drivel, this garbage, this smut, gender binaries and trans elves and whatnot. And I think we saw, Matt's right, that this is worth worrying about, and there's a non-zero chance this becomes a line of attack. But I think we saw in the most recent midterm elections that this didn't play as well as Republicans hoped with just the general population. It played better than it should have, but I think that this kind of save the children hysteria has a limited reach. This is my hope. I may very well be wrong. I have no one has ever gone broke betting against America on this issue, but my feeling is that I just don't think this is going to gain traction, but it is worth worrying about because it is something that I have also seen a lot on the internet. It's just a false concern for children and their exposure to these ideas.
As one more concluding thought is that reactionaries don't have very good arguments, but they are more than happy to distill the arguments they have into meme form, distribute them everywhere as quickly as possible, and to try and get their views out there, and that people on the thoughtful left are less likely to maybe, I guess, do the work and explain, hey, why is this depiction of this race in Dungeons & Dragons like problematic? Why should we care about this and do better? I want to cite, for example, a podcast called Three Black Halflings that had a great episode doing this for the recent Spelljammer Hadozee controversy. And I want to, before we go, Rob, I've tried to distill everything people on the right are saying down to 5 statements that I've tried to take in as good faith as possible. And I want us to just take a minute or two to respond to each of them.
Let's do it.
Okay. I think argument number 1 is, if you think evil orcs or having evil races are racist, then you're the real racist. A tongue twister there.
Again, we discussed this at length. This is a spurious argument. One, nobody is saying this explicitly, right? It's a straw man. They're attacking a statement that nobody is really making. And I know that this is too complicated for a lot of reactionaries, but the ways that these ideas and images and cultural elements have an impact are subtle. And I'm sorry if that is just too difficult for certain people to embrace, but it's also something that's been very well demonstrated by years and years and years of scholarship. So it doesn't particularly matter that it's not perhaps obvious to everyone how having evil races impacts the way we think about real life races, but it's also not something that is without precedent. It's something that's very well supported. And if you do just the barest modicum of reading about this, or even thinking about it, if you think about it really, like, honestly, it's the most honest thing in the world to me. And I don't know, maybe my brain is just too SJW, but I think that it's just a very bad argument.
Yeah, you're too steeped in cultural Marxism to think correctly,
That's right.
Rob.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a simple idea, right? The idea of evil races, it connects to racial, i.e. racist ideas from our real world, and evil races are often coded as colonized people in general, aka savages, aka dark of skin, aka described as a horde. And yeah, we can do better than that. Mm-hmm. Here's argument number 2. Gaming is changing to become more inclusive, and this is killing creativity and storytelling.
I'm sorry, this one's really easy. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think that even...
We're in the golden age of role-playing games. I
exactly.
feel like there's more games coming out now than like ever before. There's more people playing now than ever before.
There's no denying that it's hard to be an independent creator right now, but aside from the grim neoliberal present, which makes it hard for anybody to be creative financially, there's never been a better time to be an independent creator and come up with cool ideas. The sheer diversity of ideas within D&D and without in terms of TTRPGs is just, it is a golden age. It is maybe the golden age. I'm not sure it's ever been better. This is just a truly just risible. This is barely even worth responding to.
I mean, you can take any number of campaign settings. Eberron is my personal favorite that has included more diversity or inclusion or upended tropes about evil races and have made things way more creative and way more interesting.
Wildmount, Critical Role, is just extremely woke in the woke parentheses derogatory, right? It's the most like corporate. This is not like a criticism. They have the largest audience and they're trying to be good, but like it's the most like corporate boilerplate woke friendly property out there, and it's massively popular. It's so popular. Everyone loves it. This is just you have to be both subjectively and factually blind to believe this argument.
Argument negative 2, the exact opposite of the last argument, goes something like this. Dungeons and Dragons has always been inclusive. And I'll just take this one, Rob. I can't deal with this one because I'm sorry. The data, the historical record just don't bear this out. I want to make an important caveat that there have been hundreds of women who have worked on and authored D&D books. There have been untold thousands of gay players, non-white dungeon masters, queer artists, etc. But historically, the overwhelming majority of D&D products were written by white men. The advertising of the game in its early years was towards boys. TSR didn't really do customer surveys, but when WotC did them when they took over, they showed a much less diverse player base and a much smaller player base than what we have now in the 2020s, which is like 40% women, over 2/3 of the player base is under 25 years old. D&D was dying in the 90s. TSR went out of business for a lot of reasons, but I think one of those reasons is the game was just not very welcoming to new players, and it had become calcified. Other game systems, other role-playing game systems were much, much more successful in bringing new people into tabletop role-playing games. And anecdotally, for every right-winger who brings up the fact that, quote, I had a woman in my game in 1989, you can find 5 more RPG horror stories, check out that forum, of sexist dungeon masters creeping women out. I hate this argument because it really perverts stories and research and history that people are doing about marginalized people in gaming historically, and creating D&D in a space that was just irrefutably dominated by white cishet men into some kind of cudgel for any call for inclusion and acceptance today. Argument 3. SJWs are adding diversity to our games to drive us out of the hobby.
This one's true. I am trying to drive them out of the hobby. Sorry.
It was all part of our plan.
All part of our cultural Marxist plan. This is again, this is, I think I want to say this in the first episode. This is because they fear that, new people will do to them what they have done to others for their entire lives. And this is just not true. There's just no reason to believe that that's the case.
I'll just add, if gender inclusive language or like more representative art is enough to make you stop playing a game, I don't know what to tell you. This
is a personal problem. Like, this is not somebody else's problem.
The other thing is, like, this is just natural. Like, games, yep, as we just mentioned, are a golden age. Like, more people are playing. When new people come into a thing, whether it's making movies, writing literature, playing sports, right? They have new and different demands and desires, and they want to see different things. This is normal. If you don't want things to change, then no one will play this game, right?
Right. I want to go back to the sports metaphor, right? When a bunch of new types of people started playing rugby, they added the forward pass, and then it became football. And it was a different game for different people, but a lot of the people who liked rugby liked football. It is just like an evolution because more people came into the hobby, and it changed to accommodate different styles of play. That is perhaps alarming and upsetting to people who loved rugby and wanted it to never change, but rugby still exists. Football still exists. One of them sucks. One of them is great. I'll let you decide which one I think is which.
If there was no change to role-playing games, we would all be playing chainmail, right?
That's right.
And wargaming, like,
we'd be playing chess. The only game would be chess. The only game you could ever play was chess.
And the queen could only move a single space, and it would be
correct.
Boring.
Yes.
And yeah, like, since the beginning of role-playing games, people have been expanding them to new genres, new types of play, and I'm sorry, this is going to continue, right? As long as new people come in with different life experiences, they're going to want to play different types of things, right? In a small difference in like D&D and huge differences in role-playing games that do crazy and weird things.
It's just a natural consequence, and it's not always good, but it's also not always bad. It just, change is the only constant, right? It's just a thing you just kind of have to live with. It happens. Argument
4. Fantasy storytelling is just fantasy. Stop drawing real-world parallels.
This is another one of those ones that I'm just annoyed at having to take seriously because it's just so obviously untrue. Like, how disingenuous do you have to be to not see, why is there a person called a knight or a paladin or a wizard or a rogue? Like, these are all English words that refer to certain types of people, social structures, historical people. It's just fundamentally unserious, right? Like fantasy.
Right. Well, Rob, you're wrong. Paladin is a French word, so we got to stop the podcast now.
That's right. Excuse me.
No. Obviously, like fiction is a product of the real world. It doesn't take place in a vacuum.
I'm going to get a little woo here, but like part of the problem is that these people believe that they have absolute control over their own minds, right? They believe that they exist, that the world that they perceive is the only world that exists, and that everything that their minds take in and the way they remember that world is accurate and, you know, set in stone. They're not open to the idea of the truth, right? That we are deeply imperfect and malleable beings, that our minds are not our own, that we are driven and controlled by impulses, biological, emotional, social, that we do not fully have control over and are certainly not aware of. And that can be scary, but the sooner you accept that, the happier you will be, because if you try to go through life with that belief, you will be constantly disappointed, because that's just not the way that things are. That applies especially to fiction of all sorts. If you believe that it's not influenced by its surroundings, by its creators, by those involved, it's just ridiculous, in my opinion.
Baby brain
Stuff. Absolutely.
Argument for a revision of lore, the addition of more inclusive language or more diverse art are political statements and are putting politics into our gaming.
Yeah, I think Matt and I agree on this one. That's true. That is political.
Yeah. We agree with the reactionaries here. I think, yeah, these are not neutral statements.
I do want to make the point, and I made this, I think, in the first episode, but like the status quo is also political. Like this is true, but like the thing that's not true is that what exists is not political. Like that's the problem, is that all we're doing is applying our own political values, which, correct, are different than those of reactionaries. But again, defending the status quo, fighting against change, that is political as well. And so we're both being political. Too bad. Sorry.
Horseshoe.
That's right.
We agree with the
horseshoe
reactionaries. No, I mean, this is the thing. Like, I've heard people say, like, oh, if you acknowledge the existence of LGBT people, right? That's not a political statement. That's human right. No, I mean, I think it is a political statement, but I think it's the right
defending
one to make.
Human rights,
the only
defending the rights of
one,
all humans,
right?
is a political statement. It's a good one. It's okay to believe. It's okay to have beliefs. It's okay to have politics. There are good politics and there are bad politics. I'm sorry, everyone. There's no such thing as being apolitical. It is not possible.
You can't be neutral on a moving train.
Precisely. The thing about that Burke quote, right, is that it could go both ways.
A great conservative, a great reactionary, you know.
Right. He was right, but not in the ways that he thinks he was, you know. No. And if you try to be apolitical when the status quo is harmful to you know, women, people of color, trans people, marginalized people, then that's bad. I'm sorry, like that's bad. Like that is a belief that I have. I think that is a defensible, justifiable, and correct political belief. I think it's also extremely compatible with democracy, liberalism. I think it's a completely. I think it should be common sense to everybody who claims to care about freedom and rights, which is theoretically everybody who lives in America, though that's clearly not true. And the fact that it's called political as if that's a bad thing is, again, just completely preposterous.
I'm reminded of the like Fanon quote about, you know, so many years ago, the world was populated by X number of human beings and, you know, Y number of natives, right? And, you know, my politics, I would hope most people's politics is about expanding that circle of who gets to be counted as full, actualized, you know, respected and loved human beings. And we want that to be everyone, right?
All people, ideally.
I mean, that's been the great political project of the past, you know, 250, 400 years, right? That has been the defining project of politics. So yes, these are political statements, but they are good ones.
Yep. Yeah, I'll stand by it.
Rob, we've reached the end.
We've reached the end. I hope you all enjoyed this. I think it was enjoyable. This wasn't quite as depressing as some of the other deep dives we've done. And I know that some of you have to deal with these people more often in day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think I want to add, we probably have to deal with them the least amount of anyone, in that no one ever questions our ability to be in the space. To be game commentators, like so many other people get questioned. So doing this project for us is a little more easy, and I'm sure we got many things wrong. Yes. And if we did, let us know, dmofnone@gmail.com. But yeah, we should acknowledge it's pretty easy for people like us to talk about this.
It is. And in, you know, in my private games and private life, I used to much more have to negotiate these types of people and their feelings. I don't have to so much anymore, which is nice. I've built my life and my gaming hobby around that. I don't tolerate these types of people any longer, but I'd spent a lot of time sharing space with them before I knew better and before I developed, you know, tools for that. But yeah, it is much easier, Matt. No one ever, I mean, people give us shit sometimes, but nowhere near as much as they do to our peers who are not white men. So I hope that in us talking about this, we, I don't know, drew fire a little bit, and also were able to address it in a way that's less, you know, painful than it would be for somebody who has been the target of this type of right-wing rage.
All good stories should be a little bit circular, you know, like poetry. They rhyme.
That's right. It's like poetry. It rhymes. Thanks, George.
Thank you, George, the greatest storyteller of our generation. Rob, do you want to read that, to take us out, that Ursula K. Le Guin quote one more time?
For fantasy is true, of course. It isn't factual, but it's true. Children know that. Adults know it too. And that's precisely why many of them are afraid of fantasy. They know that its truth challenges, even threatens all that is false, all that is phony, unnecessary, and trivial in the life that they have let themselves be forced into living. They are afraid of dragons because they are afraid of freedom. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Don't be afraid of dragons. Don't be afraid of freedom.
Stay healthy, stay safe, but keep rolling them dice.